Hello, everyone. Chrisa is here, and today with me I have a very special guest. It is one of my teachers, my go to person when I feel stuck or when I feel inspired and I want to explore further how our body is built to move. His name is FREY Faust, and if you have been following me for some time, if you are on the Bautanz list or following posts on Facebook and Instagram that I put up, you will have noticed that a lot of times it is one of his posts or parts of his work that I would reference to. In my work and posts. So he has been working as a dancer, as a dance teacher. He has been exploring further through Axis Syllabus, um, creating the book, working in exploring further on the book and the book contents, because as you will hear him say, it's something that's still in progress and in process. Setting up and trying to expand the Axis Syllabus forum. Um, he also makes shoes. He writes a lot. So he is a very creative man and very inspiring teacher. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation I have with him, and send me some comments, send me your thoughts, send me your questions, and you're all, as he says, you're all part of the process. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome once again to this chat with me. Thank you very much for doing this, especially within our Christmas holiday. And for some people who do not know you, do not know your work and your background, can you give us like a speaker short bio sort of thing?
Yeah, so I guess you could say I'm a sort of alumnus of the 1980s New York dance boom or dance explosion. And so I was on the island when there was, a lot of different styles and thoughts about how to move being proposed. It was sort of the summit or the pinnacle of contemporary dance as a school of thought. And so that really was my crucible. Mm-hmm. Then of course, I was busy as a child dancing. My mother was a singer-songwriter, and my sister and I would dance to her songs and perform on the street. So I started when I was 8 years old, mm-hmm. doing that. And I was around for the beginning of contact improvisation, which began in 74, and I joined up at the end of it was 72, and it started kind of spreading out to the general population at 74. So you could say that I'm a second generation mm-hmm. Contact improv dancer. And that movement put a lot of the suppositions about dance in question, which would sort of lay the groundwork for contemporary dance. Mm-hmm. And then I left the United States in 1990 to start working in Germany. Mm-hmm. And it basically never went back. And I've been building my own approach through this period, and Europe has treated me with a lot of respect, allowed me to work, and many people have expressed interest in what I do. So basically, my current work has been to archive and render accessible information from the sciences and different practices concerning movement, the treatment of the human body, its preparation for different things, and to try to correlate that with practice, with current practice, to encourage a review process, mm-hmm. to see if our suppositions are correct, to see what effect the different training protocols have, to talk about educational approaches, to look at that in the light of the sociological mission of teaching or performing, or the arts in any case, mm-hmm. To think about human physiological development in anthropological terms, so not just to view dancing as an aesthetic pursuit, but also as a socio-evolutionary paradigm, and to incorporate the sciences in what we do. So that's been a growing movement, and I think we number in around 8,000 people at the moment who are active, and then there's many more people who participate, share our information, and use the information without being directly or actively involved in the review and editing process. So that's basically what I'm up to at the moment, and I go around teaching, fly around the world.
And that would be Axis Syllabus for people that are not familiar with what exactly it is that we're talking about at the moment.
Right, the Axis Syllabus is the name of the archive.
So they can access it and see what it is that we are. We're going to be talking about partly in this video. Yeah.
It's a book, and it's becoming an online kind of an online university.
Yes.
Where people can go and study different things.
So when you mentioned that you practice the principles and you test them out, you continue exploring and discovering new things. Is that a personal practice? Is that a work teaching and then looking how people react through the group classes, working privately with people? How do you, or all of the above, most likely?
All of the above.
And how does one differ from the other?
How does one of those different applications differ? Well, maybe not differ, but I feel like it's important that I walk my talk, so that I try out things on my body first. And classroom is more of a laboratory for me, so that's where I get to see if my suppositions also work for other people. Gathering experience from working with other people is useful because each person is a slightly different paradigm or slightly different variation on the human paradigm. And then going from culture to culture, you get to see like different mentalities and how people perceive the circumstance of training. Working privately is usually diagnostic, so it's usually focused to a specific discipline or like a household problem that person might have, or a specific skill set that they're trying to acquire. So in that sense, working privately can be very rewarding because you get to really focus on the intimate details that can make or break or frustrate or allow a decision to be successful. But I think basically I'm always teaching and learning. So if I'm working with myself, I'm trying something out and learning from that. So in that sense, I'm teaching myself, and then what I learn, I teach to others.
Hello.
And so then I also learn from them as I teach.
Yeah,
and it's a never-ending exchange, I think. So.
It was as I was looking through the different notes of. She's very quiet. I was looking through the different notes of, okay, so how can we set this up and all that. And I remembered when I first came to have one class with you, first thing you told me after asking me why I was there, was like, I am not a tango teacher. It's like very clearly saying that this is, I am not a tango teacher, just letting you know. Which I knew, of course, but I was intrigued after thinking about the whole process. And of course, there were a lot of stuff that helped me with my practice. But then I was thinking about that first, those first few minutes when you were asking more questions than actually suggesting. And I've noticed that this is something, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong or add to this, hopefully, this is something that you do in group classes, that then coming in your group class, you present a theme, that this is what we're talking about, which of course is necessary. And then you're asking questions as you're making suggestions. So how do you manage this balance every time?
Oh, that's a good question. Complicated, I think. The process. So first of all, I mean, there's a presumption, which is that I know something about how people can organize their bodies in a specific context in order to have a successful result. Success in terms of what they would like to happen. So, you know, if you set out to do something and you manifest that, you could say that that's a success.
Right.
And of course, since they've come to me and they're looking to me to give them the context, then a lot of times I'm also designating the result. Yeah, but I usually negotiate with them. Like I usually say, so things have mass in the universe, and everything seems to be spinning. So also you can see how things are rounded. And let's look at our bodies. Okay, so we see that actually we manifest the universe in a fractal manner. In other words, our bodies represent the way energy is moving in the universe to a great extent. And also our abilities are reflective of the way things fan out and turn, and how things are pulled towards each other and then spin. And so we have these, we have the reflection of that in our bodies, and so we can use that. We can use these principles, these physical principles, in a conscious manner, in order to arrive at the results we'd like. What do we want? So we want to be able to jump higher. We want to be able to move faster. We want to be able to be more articulate and precise, and have more balance, and maybe be able to breathe easier or have less pain. So if these are our common objectives, right, then I set that as a target, and try to have conviction from people, or that they understand that they agree with the objective. Okay, and then within this context, then of having a context that is somewhat predetermined, which is admittedly a presumption, because I don't know ultimately what is good and bad. Right. That's sort of a line that you draw on the void. But then in that context, what I need to do, I need to find out how things feel
to other people,
for other people, because for yourself that if you don't perceive something, then it's not there for you, right? Or if you perceive something differently, then you'll have a different experience of it. Right. Absolutely. So I need to understand what they're working with, like what vision of reality are they working with, and that's the nervous system gets the way the nervous system feeds back is designed a lot by perception. So that's something that is in the background often, but I know that that's what I'm working with. I'm working with their presumptions about right or wrong or success or failure or even pain, because pain is often a very subjective matter.
True. Yeah. And
so it's not, I think what I have to do is I keep checking
throughout the whole process.
I'm checking my perception also, because I know that I have the same tendency. Because how can you operate in the world if you don't make an assumption about something? You can't. Right. Like if you just think everything's
what it is,
kind of a cloud that's changing all the time, and you'll never know anything about anything, then you won't start to do anything. right? You go on the presumption that what you perceive is somehow real and definite. And so there's these there's these two sides of my approach that I'm holding in some kind of frictional or uncomfortable balance.
Yeah.
One side of my analysis is that nothing exists, or that there is no standard that exists, and perception is really very different depending on who you are. And on the other hand, I'm assuming that there's commonalities and actual standards for good and bad, which depend on health or capacity or longevity, but those are all like within the human frame. What we think is good for us as a species or as a community or as a person.
And that, I'm guessing, is what sometimes the balance always shifts. That's what I mean to say, right? Is it because there is, for example, and tango as well, but ballet I would think is a better example for it. You have good and bad when within a dance style or within a specific movement practice. So yoga has their own rules, tango has their own rules, and if someone was to say, even good and bad, that's what I mean to say, is probably subjective. It's not something that one can pinpoint and say, this is good for you or this is bad for you. Maybe in a more, would healthy be a better way to describe it then? Healthier movement?
Yeah, health is not necessarily dependent on safety. True. You can have circumstances that are overly safe, and that can actually make you vulnerable and weak. So health is sometimes being challenged or challenging yourself, and that would mean doing things that are deliberately a bit dangerous or even stressful. So, I mean, that's a context that needs definition also. Right? But if you're going for health, then the other parameters will have to be contextualized, right? As well. So I think that the problem with there's a human tendency to shear to form. So you can see that in a lot of things, in politics, religion, and in dance styles, and art styles, etc. That people will settle for something because if you keep trying to make something perfect, you'll never get it out there.
No.
Yeah. So, and perfection is only when things are actually dead, right? That's when things are static, right? Perfection is a stasis. So, but if you know that you start tinkering with something and there's just no end, right? You can just make it better and better.
Continuously.
Worse and worse.
Yeah.
Also. That's
true.
So what was I saying? Right, there's no end to it. So you have to decide to get something out there. Yeah.
Yeah. It is true though.
The problem is that when you get something out there, you know that it's not perfect, right? You know that it needs tinkering, but other people don't.
No.
So they just accept it as something like a fruit that fell off the tree, the manna that fell from heaven, the something, and they have a tendency to want to, out of respect, to want to preserve it the way it is, the way they received it, and over generations that kind of consolidates into a dogma, right? So
this is what it is.
People get dogmatic about everything. They get dogmatic about food, about clothing styles, about
Yeah.
That's because I think of this, something that's born out of respect for the author or the authors of something. They want to honor that contribution, and the way they do that is to respect the way they received it. So I got it like this, and I want to continue to give it on like this.
Right. I was thinking.
the process by which something gets invented or consolidated is usually very chaotic, right? And the person borrows from this and that and the other, and says, here's a new perspective.
Here's something.
Here's something. So that's my hope is that by admitting that to everybody who's interested in the Axis Syllabus and everybody who's interested in my work, stating outright, this is a thing in progress or a thing in process. And by being here, you're contributing to its process, not that you're receiving something definite here.
And possibly inviting people to explore for themselves.
That my hope is that they will resist the temptation to formalize it.
Right.
Although many people try, and they continue to try. But I'm trying anyway not to let that happen.
Yeah.
So, like the distinction between something like ballet, which is canonic, and it has standards which have nothing to do with health, or sometimes actually, absolutely go against health standards if we were going to set them, or even yoga, I would say, is that the choice of what, or I'd say the designation good is contextualized by the exercise, the execution of the exercise.
Right.
The ideal execution. So what is the ideal execution? Well, there's like an example is the swan stretch, where a person, putting weight on their hands and having their legs stretched out behind them is going to try to invert the kyphotic dorsal curve of their spine so that they have one long, perfect continuous curve from skull to tailbone.
Top to bottom.
Top to bottom. So that's considered good when they manage to undo the inherent curves of the spine. And you have to ask yourself a question. Why undo those curves?
If they were
that's of course never asked. Like you're told, as far as I'm concerned, that something which is unprovable, which is that this position is going to stimulate such and such a chakra, or help you live longer, or get your blood flowing, or and a number of things which I really doubt has been ever double-blind or placebo tested.
Probably not.
No, probably not. But you get these things that are just said to you. Well, it's like this because it's like this, and no questions asked, please. And if you question that, then they tell you that you're the one who's closed-minded.
Yes. Right. But this is what it is. You have to try and you have to experience. And then the Nike logo comes in. Just do it.
Yes. So, but I'm not making a pitch against form in general. I guess what I think would contribute to the longevity of forms. Well, let me rephrase that, because I think that forms put themselves in danger when they don't allow for a continuous process of renewal.
Right.
And that would require the question and answer or review process. And it would also, require that the people who are being taught have a chance to interact with the material in an innovative way. Because I think that forms put their heads on the historical chopping block when they refuse to change.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if we think about it, a lot of these things probably came up from people who were trying stuff.
Of course they did.
It wasn't like someone woke up one day and said, okay, I'm going to invent this new dance and we're going to do it this way. It was probably from people working on specific materials, having their own standards and criteria of what is good and what is bad and what is nice and what is not nice. But it was from collaborative work that all this was created.
Well, if if the people that we see in Africa, we go there often. If their ceremonies are still, authentic, what we see there in the case is that you have some kind of fractal basis for a group improv, and then people innovate using that fractal basis. And when they make innovations that people like, that everybody likes, it gets adopted by the group, and that becomes, part of the vocabulary. It becomes part of the group vocabulary. So it seems like there's not a sense that anything belongs to anybody in that context. Like the sense that there's no such notion as plagiarism.
Right.
Like if somebody makes up a move, they won't have their name on it. It's part of the part of the cultural. It's part of the sharing. So that that's a distinction from a property ownership oriented culture where legacy and credit earned and due is important. And it's just very different.
Do you think, though, that sometimes it's needed from people when they start to learn like some sort of a base? I mean, it's different if anyone is born in the culture such as the one that we just described, they know how to operate and how to learn and how to dance in that environment. But in the cultures that we are in, and I'm not sure, maybe Germany is different. It seems like people need that sort of base. So let's start from somewhere. I find sometimes once you throw that word improvisation in, and it's like, oh, what does that mean? There are no steps. Like there's nothing. Like, what am I learning here? It seems like there's no. There can't be a progression if there's no starting point, sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. Of course you need a starting point. No, I guess underlying your thought is maybe a kind of exaggerated admiration for people over there.
Maybe possibly.
But I would hasten to say that what they do is quite specific, and doesn't necessarily allow them to adapt to other kinds of movement.
Right.
So, but that's the case with any kind of movement. If you study just one paradigm, then it's going to be hard to shift over to another one. It's not because I speak this language that I can speak another one automatically. Right. You learn certain coordinations, and they're useful for that situation, and not for another. So I'm not saying that what's happening here is worse or better.
Oh no, yeah.
In Europe, but people, they make a decision to do this as a profession, and then there's a schooling process that they go through.
Right.
If you're going to go teach people late in life who've decided to do something for their bodies, then you kind of have to start at the beginning, with relatively obvious things like transferring weight from one foot to the other, or balancing on one foot for a moment, or just checking the posture of your head, or closing your eyes and letting yourself gradually sit down on the floor and lie down, and then get up again piece by piece so that you feel what effort is necessary, or so on. I mean, these are, you want to raise body awareness, you want to raise the sense of yourself in space, the sense of the other people in space, and you have to construct, little by little, and then move forward with macro movements and turning and so on. And these are then additions that gradually, when people have understood a little bit about their bodies, they can and have some choice over what their bodies are doing, right? Because oftentimes people get into habitual stasis, which is relevant for going to an office and sitting down and working at a computer and so on. They learn the coordinations that are specific to that activity. And so they would have to, readapt to a whole bunch of other ones.
Hmm.
But I think that the distinction maybe is a shared wealth of movement ideas, rather than the privatization of movement skills.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think that tendency is in Europe or in the Western world, and so that people have a definite idea about how they take class.
Mm-hmm.
So you know that you're taking class just to move, right?
Yes, you're doing the specific movements that
you're doing these specific movements, and you're just moving.
Yes.
Like you're not, or you're taking class in order to, become a movement artist.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but
that's another level of responsibility.
Yeah. Definitely. So,
or you're there as a kind of dance therapist, and so you're, widening your own range of physical skills and body awareness to be a better channel for healing, or whatever. I mean, there's different motivations.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Or even within the that group of people who just go to learn a dance, then they're doing it because they're interested in the dance itself, maybe because they want a softer way of including fitness in their life. Maybe it's the social aspect because they can go and be with a group of other people who share a similar interest, and so there are many different goals there that probably, and maybe there are couplings of them as well. So how would you, and I know this is probably a quite tough question, but after a lot of thought, and maybe I can share my thoughts and you can comment on it. I was thinking that maybe a better way to do this would be if you have a tango class, for example, or any class. The type of dance is not important. But if you have the tango class, then outside of it, maybe you could add different kinds of activities that could inform you in how your body is built to move. So within the tango class, because you only have like an hour or an hour and a half, you can spend time understanding tango itself. All the other parts, like working with a partner, listening to the music, responding to that music, etc., etc. But there needs to be an extra piece that will allow you to move effortlessly on the dance floor or off the dance floor as well. What do you think?
I think there might be basic projects in the act of moving that are pertinent to most things we'll do.
Mm-hmm.
So the study of anatomy is the study of how your body is built, or what it suggests in the way of trajectories. When you start bending and stretching and swinging yourself around,
mm-hmm.
you have topographies in the joints. You have muscle attachments in certain directions and not others, and you have fiber line pulls that give you elastic recoil and so on. And then you have the inertial values of the different lengths of your body's regions, and the various ways in which you can put them together or let them work independently somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then there's the fundamentals like rolling, crawling, standing up, sitting down, walking, running, and jumping.
Mm-hmm.
These are sort of formless forms, if you will, that have to do with the base level syllabus of the body's repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
We could say that fundamentally all other stylistic choices are extrapolations of those things.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that a basis would be to try to, consider the family of extrapolations that a style like tango represents, and and look at it paradigmatically. So what are the principles that are being applied here? You know, what are the anatomical considerations? Yeah, and then beyond the form, you have people in front of you. So, you know, what's this person's limitation, as opposed to this one's limitation? How do you adapt to the form to that limitation?
Yeah.
So I think that just to answer your question more completely, I think it would be important maybe to have moments where you, step outside the form and say, this is what underlies it. Is the the culture of the spine, which is as old as the fish, and the waveform, and the fact that we have two members here and two members here, and one bone, two bones, many bones, and then lots of little bones that are connected here, and then the crisscrossing muscles. I mean, this is something we share. So let's work with that without considering the form of tango yet. So we get comfortable with the use of the instrument and understand what choices we have, and then return to the form, so that we're going at it with a clearer sense of ourselves and what resources we have at disposition. So you're not just learning a move; you're appraising it from a sense of self and adapting it to your variation, your body.
Your body.
Because your teacher's outside of you. Your teacher's not living in there. So the real expert here is you. But you're the only expert, so that doesn't mean you're well informed.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to figure it out.
What I mean is that each person has to do their homework.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was alluding to, that how can you inspire people to do a little bit more homework, not too much homework, because I feel that that's sometimes what we miss, and then we have to make this whole big circle to come back to something that we should have learned like way back when, and because we're not aware of it, and we haven't experienced it, which is our body, we get stuck. Like that's exactly what happened to me. I was so focused on figuring tango out that at some point I knew there was a lot that I was missing. It's just that I had no idea what that was and how to possibly get unstuck.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to engineer people, to behave the way we would like them to. Some people are followers, and some people are leaders, and some people are rebels, and some people are fools, and people have different tendencies. And I don't think we're going to school that out of them. But I think there is certainly something to be said for inspiring teaching methods. That first of all, that engage people in a sort of that give a larger mission to what you're doing. That it's going beyond this act of learning that weight transfer or your arm swing. You're engaging in an evolutionary process, which has an import for the larger culture, and you're safeguarding the cultivation of and the understanding of and exquisitely sophisticated use of a miraculously intricate instrument which has been developing over millions of years, and you're passing that information on to other people. So this it can be an inspiring message to them, that this is much more important than, like, it goes beyond even you.
Yeah.
Right. It's more important. So that's one thing. The other thing is statistics of injury. So if you say, when we do this kind of movement, there are a certain like a frightening amount of people who tend to show up with chronic injuries that have to do with that. So, that might not happen to you. You might be one of the lucky ones, but maybe you don't want to take that chance. Let's consider that. One of the big things is stretching. So what ultimately what comes down to is that you don't want to stretch ligaments because that destabilizes joints. So we want to stretch muscles, not ligaments. Now the next question is, how do we know?
How? Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's one of the best reasons to study anatomy. Take a look at where your muscles are as opposed to, where your ligaments are. Check out the angles that you're moving in, and try not to challenge the joint integrity. So that's an incentive. Now the other incentive, of course, is the worst one of all, which is when people get injured.
When it actually happens.
Yeah. So they're already injured, and they're forced, by the crisis situation to make a change in the way they're doing something. And injury often spurs consciousness. Unfortunately, it's the sort of something that behavioral scientists have noticed, that people generally don't change unless there's a crisis.
Some serious
thing. But
serious stimuli.
But I understand that also, is that, why change?
If everything is good. Why?
And you'll accept to work with an imperfect behavioral pattern because at least you're fluent at it. When you change something, it's a hassle, and you make yourself vulnerable to injury just by attempting a change.
And all the time that you spend in building up whatever it is that you don't want to let go of, and
there's an emotional
of all the work that you've put in, and now you have to let it go, and all of that stuff that's probably not easy to get past.
But once again, I don't think we can make people behave a certain way, but I think you could. I think it's. There's rhetorical strategies for inspiring people to make a change, but then it's really up to them.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
To them, and I think it should be that way. I don't think there should be,
this is what you have
prison camp mentality where you have to do it, or else. Especially not in an open market situation where people, sacrifice their time and pay the money that they earned into a context. So, for example, if somebody sits down in my class, or wanders out and looks at their telephone, I ignore them. I'm not going to. I don't give any energy to it. It doesn't make me angry. I accept that as something that it's my loss. I didn't manage to capture their interest. Or maybe they have another problem that they're resolving or something.
Right.
I don't know. Moment. So I'm not judging that. I used to get very angry because that was also the way I was taught.
Well, yeah. I mean, coming from a ballet background, it's like, because, don't do that.
The way the choreographers talked to us, they were like dictators, and we were treated to insult and humiliation in class. And a lot of the people that I hung around with were, so-called progressives, and they were thinking about, a more collaborative, a more open society, a more, something more democratic. But in our practice,
oh yes, it was. I still remember the first year I came to teach in Canada. There was this lady, and she goes to me, "Have you done ballet?" And I'm like, "Well, yes." And she goes, "Russian ballet?" I was like, "Whoa, okay, this is getting quite interesting. How would you know that?" And I go to her, "Yes, but this is what? How?" She goes, "It's by the way you give feedback."
Oh.
Like, oh, okay.
Because you were so...
I guess
categorical.
I was like really straightforward, and not in my mind. I wasn't wasting people's time.
Right.
You were here to learn, and you're doing this wrong, and this is how you do it right. So do it. But that was, And I guess
which there's something to be said for that. Like I don't think that that's necessarily
bad.
Bad or wrong.
Right.
Of course not. And I mean, I think the Americans are a little bit too precious with this. If you say something, if you say this is wrong, of course it's your opinion. Like you don't have to.
Yes.
I'm gonna know that it's your opinion.
Clearly, it is my opinion since I say it's wrong.
Clearly, and also since you're representing a form, and I chose you to teach me that form, then you're going to tell me in no uncertain terms when you think that I'm not representing the form. Because that's what I came here to learn.
Right? So
yes.
Yeah, it was an interesting comment. And she said it laughing, but it was like, okay, that's an interesting note.
Yeah. But it is different. So, for example, when I'm teaching an Axis Syllabus class, which is not focused on a form,
right?
I'm focused on the application of a physiological or biological principle, and the form is irrelevant. In as much as it is. I mean, you could say this is a context. I'm using my body in this vector. So, but there's lots of different ways of manifesting that.
However, if you are looking for example, exploring the hip axis through a specific movement, there is this range of right and wrong.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I agree
there's some
with
things.
you.
I mean, things that are definitely wrong.
I agree with you in the sense that, but I would never use the words right or wrong.
Okay.
What I do is couch the ideas of correct or incorrect in more or less risky, depending on where the energy is being sent, as far as the joint is concerned. So if we're trying, like if the project is we want joint congruency, right, and we want force transmission through the joint, rather than shearing, which endangers the surrounding materials, then that's a clear indication of when we're courting risk or going towards something that has less risk. But it's not there would be, the way I'm describing it, there isn't a dividing line between absolutely right or wrong. You're going to say, okay, well, this direction is going to frustrate my intention, or this direction is going to cause me discomfort, or this direction is going to weaken my alignment, so make me less stable, make it harder to balance, or make it more difficult to breathe. Right. So, or less, but not. You know what I mean? There's always some effort or difficulty involved, and there's always some danger involved.
So this way, people will be able to make an informed decision on how they want to readjust or not their movement.
Yes, because you have people who are doing something and they don't know they're doing that, but they don't perceive that they're doing that. They perceive that they're doing something else, or they know that they're doing that because they learned it somewhere else, and it's coming. And we're told that it was correct. And they're not readapting for some reason. Right. So, in the sense that if you lift up your knee along a monoplane to the front, that's really different than allowing your knee to take an arc to the side and having your leg go through, simultaneous external rotation while it abducts. Well, okay, so this is a specificity, you could say. Yeah. So this you could say is not that. Yes. Not that it's wrong or right. It's just that this is different. Right. Okay. Now we could talk about the relative augmentation, or the increasing risk of continuing to flex along a monoplane with a joint structure that is oblique. Right. So if you're insisting on a movement which would require an entirely different joint, If the joint was rectilinear like this, then you could expect
that would be the movement.
It's like this. Yeah. So if you continue on a monoplane, then you're distorting the joint surface. If you want to maintain the integrity of the joint, then you would have to follow its construction.
Right. So as long as you know.
That's the point.
That's the point.
If you know and you're choosing it consciously.
Yeah, I'm choosing to do this.
Fine.
Okay. All right, then.
but if you didn't know, well, then you're not making a choice.
No, right? It's just whatever you're used to, maybe a habit or something like that. So if someone was to start now and they said, like, they heard all this and they're like, okay, where would I start from? Say they have some movement background, not necessarily a professional, maybe now just starting or, having done a few classes. Let's keep it to the minimum of movement. What would be a couple of things that they need to start with, learning more about?
Well, once again, for each person, that would be probably different. I can only say where I started, which has seemed to work for a number of other people who followed me.
Okay.
Which is a reconsideration of walking. And the basics are to swing the swing leg, to bring the heel closer to the midline, to allow the swing hip to come around with the leg. And so that means to allow the lower body to rotate axially with the walk, and to have a slight flare in the way the feet are presented on the ground. So if the heel is more centered, and there's a slight flare, then the tendency would be to build up the arch as the foot is falling down on the ground, rather than walking
flat
in parallel, which would tend to put too much weight on the inside, and then the person is obliged to pull themselves out of that situation rather than deciding how much they're going to give up. So working with swing phases, studying the reception, so that making sure that the knees are really aligned to the foot, calibrating that with arm swings, checking breath, if it's free and easy, considering the posture of the head, and you could go into energy transmission. So not holding the body, not holding the trunk in a static block,
right?
But starting to allow for subtle undulations, and checking the three different ones we have. So transverse, sagittal, and frontal plane transmission. And as Mabel Todd, who really was the grandmother of all of this, somatic research in the 1920s, as she says in her book, The Thinking Body, walking is a triaxial movement. It's an undulatory triaxial movement. So that's,
Start from there.
That's something that, I think walking is deceptively complex. It seems simple, right? But it's actually a very complex movement, because once you get going, there's very little way it's very hard to parse the different phases. They're all feathered
from
into
one
and over
from
each
the
other.
other. Yeah.
And it's also a movement that we consign quickly to unconsciousness and to unconscious habit. And since it is the base pattern of our movement, that in 2 hours you can take about 4,000 steps. So that's a lot of times to drive in a pattern. Or it's also conversely a lot of repetitions that you could be studying that pattern and trying to optimize it. So there's the straightforward walk, but then there's turning corners and pivoting and walking backwards, and then the transition into running. And these are like, I think, a fundamental. This is the ongoing classroom that everyone has in their lives.
True.
You know, and that's really where you want to look.
Mm-hmm.
You want to look at your everyday movements.
Mm-hmm.
You know, okay, so how do we wash dishes? How do I pick something off the floor? You know, what is it that I'm always complaining of back pain. Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not that I'm going to go take a painkiller or go to have somebody adjust me that's going to fix that. Because if it's a chronic situation, then it's whatever I'm doing in my life that's getting me into the tangle.
And
that's
causes
where I
the
need
trouble.
to look.
Yeah.
So, and that's the paradigm I'm going to take with me into any movement study. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I think the excavation has to begin.
Okay. Yeah. Starting from something you do every day and paying more attention, I would say, I guess. And then looking at walking as an opportunity to explore the body further.
Yes, when every time you do something, there's a large part of things you don't control in it.
Oh yes.
So the interest is in finding out how much choice you actually do have, or how much choice is actually appropriate.
Oh, right.
And for every context, there'll be a range of appropriate choices and an even larger range of inappropriate ones.
Mm-hmm. Possibly.
So the question is also to find out, you know, which is which.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and not settle for you know, suboptimal behavior patterns that ultimately, through repetition, end up injuring you.
Right. Yeah. Accepting that this is what it is, and just taking the painkiller at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really, you know, the beginning of a downward spiral.
Yeah. Yeah. You did already mention one person that people could look towards, but
Mabel Todd. Mm-hmm.
Do you have other people? I know you have at least one special person you like to talk about. And
Irene Dowd,
mm-hmm.
Serge Grakowecki,
mm-hmm.
Well, Robert Schleip and those people, Tom Myers,
right,
Feldenkrais, Moshe, Alexander,
mm-hmm.
Alexander Traeger, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, Body Mind Centering,
yes.
Anna Halpern. Oh my goodness, there's so many more.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
But that's a start at least.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to.
Yeah, if people want to get started and, look into and at least have a starting point to
mm-hmm.
start discovering and to start exploring. And in the world of contemporary dance, in the world of contact improvisation, there might be some people listening that might want some other links to other people that they could look up to.
Well, there's a very fine festival in Kiev every year that's put up by Ruslan. I can't remember his last name. Sorry.
It's okay. We'll find it.
There's a contact festival in Kiev, and I think it's a very interesting event.
Mm-hmm.
My mentor is Nita Little,
mm-hmm.
who was one of the first people to start doing contact improvisation before it even had a name.
Right.
And then there's people in the Axis Syllabus circle,
mm-hmm.
Dan Bear Davis, Kira Kirsch, Zoe Solomons, Jerome Dorsal, and Baris Mirci. I teach contact improvisation. In fact, I'm going to Goa very soon to do that.
So
There's a festival there also.
That would have been my next question. What do you have coming up? Where can people find you teach?
So I think the best thing is if they go and consult my calendar
mm-hmm.
at freyfaust.org. And that's where I keep all the dates that I'm working on. So I don't think it's so useful to talk about everything. But the next two major touring destinations are Goa, India, for the Contact Improvisation Festival there, and Oida, Africa, where I'll be joining this project that my wife has been developing over the last 20 years, which is a cultural exchange with continental locals and people from elsewhere, where we also share what we understand about biomechanics, and learn some of their traditional dances, and evaluate them in terms of energy efficiency and health, etc. So they share something about their philosophy and the spiritual reasons why they're doing something, and we get to experience something about how they collectivize that process and witness ceremonies, and we share this perspective, like an under the skin revelation of what things are doing in there. And I always find it an extremely rich learning experience on so many different levels. But I really recommend it to anybody who would like to do it.
It sounds
exciting. It's not easy. It's a really challenging thing. It's you're going into a situation where civilizational comforts might
not be there. Yeah.
But I think the exercise is well worth it, and also, to be in a situation where you don't really understand what's going on, and you don't understand why people are behaving the way they do.
Yeah.
But they do, and so you get a sense of how things could be organized differently and still make sense.
And it's probably one of those experiences where you have to leave your ego at the door and say,
and
okay, there are other people and they are doing things differently, and I'm here to see that. And you don't have to accept it. You don't have to, go and live with them at the end of the day. But you should be open to listening.
Listen, try.
Yeah, just to try.
Witness.
Yeah. And possibly if you can share, I guess, because it's not easy to share, I think. Because you're like, okay, I need to absorb all this. I'm not sure if I can share anything. Okay, and it feels like this is a good spot to wrap this up. And one just fun question: if you had like a billboard or an empty wall where you could write something, what would that be?
I think I would write some encapsulated form of something I posted recently on Facebook, which is abstraction allows for the perception of the principles behind form. I don't know how many people would understand that, but it's for me. It goes to the heart of the friction between the necessity to presume, but the reality of the necessity to question. So I think that's what I would write.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And all the best to all the exciting things that you're doing. Hopefully we'll get to meet in like not in the internet environment. And as soon as possible. I'm always looking forward to group classes that you put together. They're always fantastic.
I forgot to say that Francesca and I are coming back to Toronto.
Oh, awesome!
So, yes, we'll be there early June.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we're setting up.
So it's already scheduled.
Yes, a 10-day event, and so I will also be in Quebec for the 2 weeks previous, at the end of May. So I'm coming to Canada.
I'm coming to Canada.
I'll be in your neighborhood.
Yes.
At least on your continent.
At least. And Quebec is not that far. It's okay. So great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you, Chrisa.
All the best for 2020.
Same to you.
Bye.